Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about how to create functions outside of DataFlex so that you can actually use them. So first of all, let's talk about what we need. At this moment, I am using Visual DataFlex 16.0, but feel free to use any version of DataFlex. And we will be using Visual Studio 2022. And first of all, let's go over the requirements. So if you launch your Visual Studio installer, and I would point out certain things that you need to make sure that you have it. So for your Visual Studio 2022, make sure that you have a certain options enabled. So the first one is this one, the desktop development with C++. That is very important because we will be creating components using C++. And make sure that you have this particular thing checked, C++ ATL version 143. So if you have an older version of Visual Studio, that is still okay, Visual Studio 2019 or 2017. So make sure the corresponding option is checked. So C++ with ATL, okay, and the entire C++ development option. So I assume that since you have Visual Studio, you probably would do .NET development. So make sure you have. You can check the .NET desktop development, but it's not necessary. The usual thing, ASP.NET, that kind of stuff is good enough. But that's it. That's about it. So make sure you have DataFlex and Visual Studio installed. Again, 17, 19, or 22, everything will work. Okay. So obviously, in different version of Visual Studio, the stuff within the studio are gonna be a little bit different. So we are going to look at things that are outside of DataFlex. So first thing that we want to take a look at is your system folder. So Windows or Microsoft has created a lot of functions for you to use. Now, whether you know how to use them, that's basically why we're here, is that we're gonna try to see what they have, and we'll try to create something similar to what they have, and we're gonna consume that in DataFlex. So let's take a look at this example, like shell32.dll. So I'm in C Windows syswow64. So I'm looking at 32-bit DLL because I'm using Visual DataFlex 16.1. And if you are on DataFlex 23 or something, then you might want to look at some other DLLs that's 64-bit. But for the time being, we're going to look at this. So I assume most of you don't read Chinese. So I'm going to go over this tab. So you just have to take my words for it. Those are the functions you can actually call. So this tab actually shows you within a DLL, those are the functions you can call. Okay, so I'm gonna take one of the functions. Like you look at those functions, you're like, what are those? Like, what can I do? Where can I find documentation? If it is from Microsoft, chances are it's gonna be on their website. So the trick is to actually search the name. Like let's just say that I pick a random function. That looks pretty. Let's pick a simpler function. String ncmpa. Okay, string ncmpa. And then for good measure, just type in MSDN. It used to stand for Microsoft Developer Network. They don't use that word anymore, but this is a magic word in Google or in any search engine to find API documentation. So you'll see that I just happened to pick a really bad function to look at. Let's just look at any one of them. So it would tell you how to call it, what are each parameter, so on and so forth. So I'm going to look up one that is a little bit more common. Let's just say that it's called shell notify icon. I just know it by hand. So you're gonna see it's gonna have an A at the end. Just go with it, and then you click on it, and then it will tell you all this stuff that you need to call this function. Now today we're not gonna go into how to call system functions. We're gonna see how we create one. So let's dive into it. First of all, whenever you launch Visual Studio, depending on what you're doing, you want to launch it with administrator as administrator, because later on we will be creating OCX files or ActiveX control or COM automation, and when you register it, it does require Visual Studio to be running as administrator. So for good measure, just launch it as an administrator. Okay. So having said that, I did create a solution beforehand so that we don't have to type all this kind of stuff. But at the end, I will go through the process. Might make some mistake here and there, but I do have a good version of the sample that I was going to prepare. So we're all going to dive deep into it. All right, so first off, you'll see that this solution is called Math Library. In it, there are multiple projects. As you can see that a single solution can have multiple type of projects. You can mix match C++, web projects, C#, so on and so forth, or Visual Basic.NET, or whatever that you feel like that Visual Studio can create. So this solution is called Math Library. So we're going to go from step to step about DLL and OCX and so on and so forth. So first off, the functions that you see in the shell 32.dll, the one that we just saw right here, those are created by Microsoft, so you can use those. So our goal right here, right now, is to create a DLL that can be consumed by DataFlex. So let's go into it. When you create a project, you can just do a I'm going to launch another copy of it so that I can actually do the corresponding one. So, but I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it dynamic library. So you can just type it in here since I just used it, so it just pops up right there. So so I'm going to create one, and the project name is, like, let's just say that C++. Let's just call it C++. And the solution name is Math Library. So the entire thing is a math library, but this is just using C++ to do it. So we can create that, and then you can just create. And so having said that, this is the creation process. Then you add stuff to it. Now, for the sake of time saving, it's like a cooking show, right? I mean, we're just gonna show you the final result instead of showing you all the typing. So in here, the process is pretty simple. You have the boilerplate code. So I'm going to show you the boilerplate code that they created. Okay. And for you to add functions, all you have to do is write out the C code and put a comment on top of it, and you're good to go. Okay. And so we're going to look into what we're looking at. Okay. First thing first, you notice is that there's a kind of weird symbol here. It's called extern C. So without diving too deep into it, you do need that for DataFlex because it depends on basically it changes the naming convention when you export the functions. So I want to export the functions like how I name it within here. So you will see that you will add this is basically the line to tell the compiler or the linker to export your function. So things to note, usually your function, you would see something like this, int add integers, like I just say integers, and then you do your things. Like the new thing that you see here is extern C and Win API. So Win API is what we call calling convention. So it has to do with assembly, how parameters are passed to the stack. I'm not going to go through that. All you need to do is that for DataFlex to consume your stuff, you need to add Win API here, or API entry, or there are many names for that, Pascal or callback. But for the tutorial's sake, just Win API, stick with it. This is allows you to export. This is allows you to be consumed by DataFlex per se. And this one is to tell the linker what to do. Okay, so in this thing, you would call a function name. And the export, you will see that I would name the function here first, and then I would have an underscore, the name of the function, and at 8. So why is that 8? So this is a 32-bit DLL. So we're going to count the number of parameters that you have and then multiply by 4. So if you have 0 parameter, this would be 0. If you have 1 parameter, it will be 4. 2 parameters will be 8. So this is, I take 2 parameters and then I'll return the return doesn't really matter. So for this function, obviously this is adding 2 integers together. I'm not going to explain what it is. This one is to do XOR. So if you actually look into DataFlex, it has an operator called IAND, and it has an operator called IOR. Now XOR is this exclusive OR. So feel free to look up the definition on Wikipedia, but basically it's really useful for toggling a bit. Again, not going to go into that, but just knowing that you're toggling a bit. So when we do that and we build the program or build the project, so I'm going to right click on this guy and I'm going to build. Now notice that where it generates the DLL, it generates within here. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into that folder. So you will see that with C++. Now I did create a DataFlex program. So I'm going to put it here, well, which I did already. So I'm going to place it here. And I'm going to look into the DataFlex program. As you can see that in order to import it, so we're going to talk about multiple things. So as you recalled, the name is called add integers. So whatever is in the quote, it has to be stuff that is exported from the DLL. Whatever you name here doesn't matter. You can name it A, B, C, D, E, F, doesn't matter. The name of the DLL, which is called with cpp.dll, and then it takes in 2 parameters, or 2 integers, and returns an integer. And the same thing here. So as you can see that I just created a simple test program to showcase what it does. So I'm gonna run this program real quick. As you can see from the demonstration, is that 5 plus 6 equals 11, 5 XOR 1 is 4, 4 XOR 1 is 5. We're toggling the last bit of the number. Pretty simple. So with normal DLL, like this one C++ created DLL, you have to put the DLL in the same place as the program. So the test.exe is here. So the DLL has to be in the same folder. Now there are ways to get around that, but for the sake of simplicity, you just have to understand, you just have to copy the DLL within the same folder as the executable. You don't have to register or do anything special with it. Just copy and you'll be fine. Now let's just do a demonstration of saying that what if the DLL is not here? I'm gonna rename it and then double click on this program, and then you're gonna get a bunch of error messages saying that DLL is not there. So I'm gonna put it back and we are good. So all right. So this is the simple form of DLL. Now, Microsoft has created many functions. So in my past time, you're talking about Windows 95 days, I would go to the system folder here. I would actually look into every single DLL just to see what they have. to see if you can call random functions, and that will look up documentations and stuff like that, just to see what is there. The main thing that I can tell you is that one of them is called WinUser or user32.dll. It has a lot of useful stuff, and the other one is kernel, and then the last one is GDI. So those are the useful one, and then shell, absolutely. And then SHLW API, that's like shell lightweight API. So those are the common ones. Let's just say that if you're diving deep into internet stuff, and then you will see WinINets. Look at where my the cursor is at. And then maybe you feel like that you want to do some low-level internet stuff, then you will see sockets or some kind of sockets. I can find it here, but you got the idea. So there are some main DLLs that are really common, but there are so many DLLs or APIs available for you to use. So you just have to look it up and consume it. So this tutorial is showing you how to create one and be consumed by DataFlex. So next thing that we're going to talk about is to create some kind of ActiveX or COM library. Again, for the sake of time, we're going to jump right into the final result. So in order to create something to be consumed by DataFlex, you can not just create plain functions like that. You can actually create objects and whatnot. Those are good to be used by Visual Basic or other C++, .NET, even Visual DataFlex to use. So we're gonna go into this this project. Now this project is called a ATL project. It's called ActiveX Template Library or Active Templates Library. So in order to do that, so I'm gonna go into here. So within the same solution, I'm gonna add something new. So I'm gonna right click on solution, and then I'm gonna add a new project. Now I've done that before, so you can just type in ATL here if you haven't done it before, but it's ATL project since I just used it. So it's showing up on my most recent template. So I can do that, and then my math library, let's just say that I call it with ATL. So instead of with C++, I'll just call it C++. With ATL is fine. All right, just create it, and then we'll ask you a lot of questions, uncheck everything, just create it like this. So if it is checked, just uncheck it. So I'm gonna click OK. And again, I don't want to do all the typing, so the typings are done way beforehand, but I just want to show you what would happen. So when you create something like this, you will realize that it created two projects. One is called with ATL, one is called with ATL PS. For the most part, you can ignore this guy, and then you're just gonna focus on this guy. Now, the way to add things are a little bit different for this one. And when you're here, you do want to add your code in different place, not with the files that are generated. So so let's go to source files, not generated files, but source files. So what you want to do is right click and then add, and then add new item. And then that's the time that you create your object and class. So choose ATL, and then choose ATL simple object. So let's just say that math library with ATL. So that's your simple object. So you just add it, and then it will default a lot of things. Go ahead and just accept the defaults and finish. Now this is a little bit more cumbersome, a lot more cumbersome than before. So after you created it, you see that there are quite a few errors, but it's not errors. It's just that we're solving it or analyzing the project. Make sure you go to oh, by the way, make sure you go to release and x86 because we're targeting 32-bit at this moment. And then in order to add stuff, you have to do multiple process. One is that we're gonna go into class view. Now, if you don't have this tab, make sure to go to View and then go to Class View. So since I have it open, it's there. And what you would do is to find the library you just created. So this guy, set on here, and then you add a method. And then I'm gonna do it real quick. Let's just say that I call it add integers. And here is the tricky part. Now, one thing to note is that whenever you are creating ActiveX control or anything or COM automation, you have only one return type. The return type is always called HResults. Okay, even though your stuff is returning a string, an integer, it doesn't matter what you're returning. You're returning HResults. Then you might ask, how do I return anything else other than HResults? You would have to actually check this box, set the last parameter as a return value. So so I'm gonna add two integers together. So it's a long, and then I'm just gonna say I. Okay, great. It automatically adds in front of it, as in this is an input parameter. And then I'm gonna have a J here, so input, and then I'm gonna have a return value. So we're gonna pass by reference. Now this is in C++, so brush up your C++ skills. So you can just say long. So automatically it's gonna be out because it kind of know what you're trying to do when you say return value. So notice that there's a ID is 1. Now this ID can be anything, but we're gonna refer back to this. We're gonna look into why 1 or what is this for. Now, then we're gonna click OK. So after you add it, it would add a lot of boilerplate code for you. You'll see this, and then you'll see a lot of things here and there. So the thing to note is that the moment you added this interface function, you see ID 1, and then we can take a look at this guy. Okay, or not. Yeah, let's go back to Solution Explorer for this. And then we're gonna go to source files, and then we're gonna go into math library with ATL. And here, they decided not to do the implementation for me. I don't know why, but in theory, it will actually create something called standard method. Obviously, we're not gonna dive deep into this. We're gonna go into the ones that we made. Let's take a look at this. So in here, it will actually do this for you. This is standard method implementation. So all it does is that it will do the appropriate calling convention and whatnot. And as you can see, once you add the interface, then you can just add the actual implementation. Now our code is really simple. We're just using C++ operator, and then it will do the magic. Now you always want to return the success or failure of the function. The return value is actually passed by reference like this. So this is your return value. So you put the return value as the last one. And DataFlex will be smart enough to pick up that kind of stuff. We're gonna take a look at that. Now pay attention, we have 3 parameters. One of them is used for return value. We're gonna look at the corresponding DataFlex code. And when you compile, you will actually generating some things. Let's just say that I'm gonna compile this guy, right click, and then I'm gonna build this guy. So when you build it, it will register it to your registry. So that means that you can actually consume it. Okay, and as you can see that this is where the library is at. Now this is the tricky part. This is not a plain DLL. This is actually, you have to actually register it using reg server 32. So in case you don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm gonna go to administrative command prompt. It has to be administrative command prompt for this guy. And then now the Visual Studio is gonna do that. It's gonna do that for you. But in case that they didn't do it, you can just do reg svr32, and then just type in the library. I think it's math library with ATL.DLL. As you can see, it says success. Obviously, I tried it before. Yeah, it's successful. So now let's take a look at what you would do in a DataFlex situation. So I have a sample workspace called test OCX. And in here, I did some coding. So assuming that I haven't done it, what you would do is that make sure you have a project opened. So in my solution or workspace, I do have a test SLC. So what you would do is that when you're creating with ATL, active template library again, then you would create a class, okay? And then you're gonna import COM automation. And click OK, and then it will ask you what library do you want to import from. And you're gonna look into math library with ATL. So it's gonna ask you, hey, that's where I'm gonna create stuff, is okay, and then you click OK. And then it's gonna ask you to overwrite because I did that before, so that's why you're not gonna see this particular prompt. Okay, so import it. So as you can see earlier on, I did stress the importance of going back to the header files. I do stress the importance of when you add a function, it will tell you like what is the ID earlier on, right? I think let me go back to the class view with ATL, and then with this guy, I think you can see that there's some kind of interface ID here, 1 and 2, right? So this is kind of important because sometimes things are referred by numbers. In DataFlex, we definitely refer things by number, not by this. The name of it doesn't matter. It's by 1 or 2. So, or 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that number is. Let's go back to DataFlex. This is the code that got generated. As you can see, the most important thing that is this line. Get invoke COM method and then 1. Why is that 1? Because that's the ID of the function. This one doesn't matter what it is. It can say A, B, C, D, E. Doesn't matter. This is the number to identify the thing. As you can see that to pass parameters to a COM object is kind of convoluted. You have to define the number of parameters and then push based on the type and then get it back and then get the result value. So, but luckily for you, you don't have to write anything like that. It will be done for you by DataFlex. So let's take a look at how we call this guy. So I'm gonna look at the sample here. So the library that got created is called COM library. Now, one thing to note is that the auto create property is set to no auto create. That means that when you create an object, it's not usable. You have to instantiate it one more time. Okay. So that's why you say, oh, I'm going to create the object. Now, before I can use it, I have to send COM create object. Now, this line number 7 creates the DataFlex object, but the corresponding COM object is not created until you call this guy. The reason is that you set it to no create, so it doesn't create an internal object. So let's go back to it. You created this guy, and then you call it just like any functions. Blah, 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 and then so on and so forth. So I'm not going to explain. This is pretty straightforward C++ code or DataFlex code. So I'm not going to explain too much. As you can see that the DLL doesn't have to be with the executable. You just have to register it. So you can put it anywhere. Okay. So as you can see that doing things with C++, the OCX method is kind of cumbersome, and so if you are to write something, highly recommend that you just do normal C++, like the external function version. Now, another thing to note is that in this case, whenever you this is for importing C++. Whenever you define a external function, this thing is global, assuming that this is a, not assuming, this is a global function. Now, if you're going back to using ATL to create stuff, this one, you just create a normal class, just a class. So if you're just using plain C++, then you are creating external function like this. So this is pretty straightforward, like this, you can import it pretty easily. And this one is a little bit more tricky. To create things, yeah, it's just a lot of things that they will edit for you. And if you don't know where to add stuff, it's kind of difficult. But there are plenty of tutorials on YouTube. You can go back and refer back to it. So, but this is just to show you the basics, the very basic of creating stuff to be consumed by DataFlex. Now, good news is that there are easier way to do things. So let's take a look at the easier way, because we're going to use C#. All right, so we're going to ignore everything. Don't save. We're not going to save anything. Now, in this particular sample, you can continue to add a new project type. Let's do that. I'm going to add a new project. This time, I'm going to use class library .NET framework. Now, again, you can actually type it in here. Okay. And I'm going to double click on this guy because, you know, I have it selected. And this time I'm going to say with C#, right? And make sure you choose a .NET framework that's still supported, like 4.6.7. But with .NET framework, the catch is that you have to deploy .NET framework, or you are banking on your customers to have .NET framework installed on their machine. So with C++ stuff, you don't have to worry about that. With C#, you do have to worry about that. Now, assuming that you're deploying to, you know, Windows 10 or Windows 11, all your users are using modern operating systems, then you probably don't have to worry about 4.5, 6, 7, even 8. I think 4.62 is comes with Windows, but don't take my words for it. Go ahead and Google it. So for the sake of this example, I'm going to use 4.5 because that's what we use normally. So I'm going to create. In that sense, I'm going to try to remember how to do things like this. All right, so in here, you're still creating normal classes in C#, but at the end, it will actually be you are able to use C# code because you're exporting that as a COM object instead of a .NET object. Now, again, save some typing. We're going to go right into the pre-created project. So we're going to go to Solution Explorer. We're going to go look into the file. So we're going to look at C++. All right. So look at this. All right. It's a lot simpler. Everything that you do is within this file. So you're not going to have like multiple projects and got certain number of header files. So in C++ is easy. So whenever you are about to create a class, you should create a interface first. Interface is just basically function declarations or object declaration or struct declaration or class declaration without implementation. So the important thing to note is that before the interface, you have to tell that it is visible, because you can actually create a COM object that's not supposed to be used. Maybe you have an interface that you have created before, and then now it's obsolete, and you don't want to be discovered anymore, but it's still usable. Then you can choose COM visible false, and then so this is important. Now grid, you can just give it a grid. Now you might ask, how do I create a grid? So Visual Studio has a really handy tool right here, tools, and then create grid. And then make sure you choose this guy. You can choose different formats, and every time you can just new grid and then just copy it. And then you would just generate a grid. So in the C++, in the ActiveX COM object world, everything has to have a grid associated with it. Now, with the ATL project earlier on, everything is created for you, so you don't have to worry about anything. For this, you have to manually put a GUID in there, like you can see that. This one is important. You are creating a iDispatch interface. What it means is that this is going to be able to be consumed by Visual Basic as well and other programming language. There are multiple options, but this one is the one that you want to use. There are interfaces is deriving from IUnknown. This is deriving from iDispatch. I'm not going to go into details. There are differences, but this one is going to allow you to be consuming this class in DataFlex. Okay, so you create you got some attributes here, and then you create interface. And then you do have to manually assign a ID to it. Like I said earlier on, in other project it's like a ID, but now it's called dispatch ID. Okay, so you add some function declarations here. Now the implementation. Now the implementation, we remember this one is a little bit tricky. This one is an interface type for this interface. This one is a class interface for class. So again, not gonna go too deep into why it's none. But just take my words for it. So again, create a GUID. Now this is what is going to be registered in the registry later on, and then make sure it's COM visible is true. Now implementing that is just simple C# code. I mean, just plus minus. C# and C++ still have similar syntax in some way. So for this, it looks exactly the same. So when we compile this guy, make sure that you can use right-click on the project and choose properties, and in here during the build here, and make sure you check the box register for COM interop. Now because you're creating a ActiveX kind of COM object, you do have to register it. Now this one is a lot more tricky than the other one. The reason being is that when you compile this guy, so I'm going to compile it. Now, make sure that you notice where it gets created. So when you build it, or you rebuild it, okay, so it shows you that this is the destination. Okay, so you do want to know where it is. I'm just going to hit Control-C to copy it. Okay. And there is a program called REGASM. So this is very tricky. This guy is inside this particular path on your machine. So I'm gonna create a handy text file. Otherwise, you have to refer REGASM into this folder. Okay. So I'm gonna create a quick bash file. Basically setting a path so that when I type in REGASM anywhere, it will do something. Okay, or not this guy. Okay, all right. So what do we want to register? So since we kind of talked about, so I copy and paste this guy. So here. So if I do a DLL, you can see that there's a TLB, PDB, and DLL. So we want to register the DLL. So instead of using REGSVR32, this is the one that you usually use for C# created COM object. You have to use REGASM. Okay, and then I'm gonna say with C#. Now, if you don't have the TLB, we're gonna go into what the TLB is. Then you want to say TLB. I forgot exactly. I think TLB, yeah. And then at the end, choose code base, and then we have to specify the DLL. So regardless of this, I did make a mistake, because in order to register anything, you need to run administrative command prompt. So right-click, run as administrator, and we get to type a lot of things. I'm gonna go to the project because everything I've created is on my desktop. I think it's called good. Oh, you know what? I can just cd this guy. I did copy and paste. Okay. Okay. So reg asm with C# .dll /tlb /code base, and then it will say successfully blah 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 blah. So it registers successfully. So what do you want to do next? Is that in DataFlex you can do file, new class, the same thing, import com automation. This time, because it's C, because it doesn't actually show up in this list. I don't know what DataFlex used for creating this list, but it does pick up something, it doesn't pick up something. So this is the one that we created earlier on with ATL. This one, we have to browse it. Make sure that if it is not on the list, you can browse it manually. So you browse to it. Now, again, it's on my desktop. I call it good. And then it is in C#. And then it's in the bin. And then it's in release. And then there's a TLB file. So go ahead and look at the TLB file. And then since I've done that before, it will ask me, hey, do you want to overwrite? And I say yes. And as you notice, that the entire thing looks pretty similar to the one that you just created. The C# library and the ATL library are looking pretty much the same. You're still having ID 1 and 2, and the implementation is exactly the same, like in both ways. So we're gonna look into this guy, the C# version of it. So we did test the C++, we're gonna test the C# version of it. Okay. Again, we have to create it, create COM objects, and so on and so forth. So we're gonna run it. And as you can see, it does the math correctly. And then it does do the XOR correctly. Now this is obviously fast and furious. I haven't talked about how to extend on this, and I didn't show you too much. But this is just to give you a good idea of what you would do. Now, if you are not too confident about creating COM objects, obviously just do everything in DataFlex. But there are times that there will be libraries in .NET that you want to use. Then it is a good idea to know how to create that in .NET. Now, as of in C++, I would not recommend most people to do it, only if you are familiar with ATL, but this is the tutorial. Now, one of the things that I do want to talk about before we end this presentation is that what is how does DataFlex generate the wrapper, this kind of code? How do they do it? What are they looking at when you register? What's happening? So I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into the code. So when you generate a COM object using ATL, the one that was a lot of header files, that one, it does create a DLL, and then within it, it actually has a lot of information that you can look at. Not every single DLL is like that, but only the ones that with exporting COM objects. So there's a particular program called OLE View. So I'm going to take a look at where I created from. Now, if you install Visual Studio, the Windows SDK is going to be installed with your program. So the location is usually C program files, Windows Kits, 10, bin, whatever the latest SDK version, and then x86 OLE View. Okay, so when I look at the OLE View, now this is just deep dive into the stuff that we just created. Go to File, View, Type Library. Okay, so we're just gonna look at stuff. So I'm gonna go back to my desktop, and then I think it's inside good, and then you can see that I'm gonna look into this one first. It's in the release folder, and then we're gonna look into math library with ATL. And then as you can see, that looks awfully similar to what DataFlex generates, right? So it does say what is the return value, what is the ID, and everything. Now this one, when you're using C++, they merge the what we call type library into the DLL. So it's one thing. So as you can see, you can just look at DLL. But we're gonna look into how C# creates stuff. It's a little bit different. So C#, so I'm gonna close this guy. The C# one is, let's take a look at it, view library. The C# one is actually separated. So I'm gonna go to C# and then bin and then release. And then as you can see that there's a TLB and a DLL. Now the TLB is the one that actually stores the type information, and that the type information is not needed in runtime, but it's needed in compile time to generate the COM wrapper. So if you look into that, so in C++, those two are merged together, but in C#, they separate the two, which is actually better in a sense, because at runtime you don't need that information for our sake, not for other Visual Basic people, but Visual DataFlex, we just need this one during compile time. But once we generate the wrapper, we don't need the TLB information. But it's not that big anyway. So when you look into the TLB, it looks extremely similar to what you have. Obviously, the grid are different, but you know the everything else is similar. Oh, this one is actually returning not actual result. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't notice that. But regardless, there you have it. All right. So we can discuss any questions that you have, but until then, this is basically the quick overview on how to create code outside of DataFlex that can be consumed in DataFlex. I'm pretty sure you will have a lot of questions, but this thing has been going on for too long. So I will see you guys next time.